Hey, how's it going, guys? This is Coach Wilson. Back to talk with you guys more about speed training. For now, I'm going to just kind of do some random topics here and there until I can eventually get my books, which I had left at my old place. And so I just moved recently. And once I get those, I want to start as soon as I can on that chronological series about speed training, looking at it from a historical perspective, from at least like the past couple of 100 years, and how there's different perspectives on training and how things have developed. But for now, I want to talk about cueing today, and specifically talking about coaches' perspectives versus athlete perspectives, and how we can get both to connect, get the coach and the athlete to connect for optimal results. And so, whether you're a coach or an athlete, I hope that you're going to be able to benefit from this. I wanted to start off with a quote from the forums of Charlie Francis. If you don't know who Charlie Francis is, he was a coach of Ben Johnson and many other of Canada's top sprinters back in the 80s. And he also coached a few other people outside of that realm. But it's a great forum, great resource. His wife, Angela, still runs the website. Of course, Charlie's been deceased for a while now, but she does such a great job of allowing this information to still be up. I mean, the website's been around for, I don't know, 20 years or so, probably a little longer actually, probably like 25 or something. But at any rate, great resource. And Flash is one of the users on here, one of the members who had a really good quote that I wanted to start out with. Flash, I don't know his identity. I wouldn't just reveal it if I did know it, but I think he was a pretty high level sprinter at one time from what I've read. He was probably elite or maybe just below elite level, but he was a high level sprinter, no doubt. And he has a lot of great advice. But he says here, there's often a vast difference between what the athlete's body is objectively doing in space and what the athlete is subjectively feeling while doing it. Coaching cues have to center on what the athlete is feeling. So that sums it up a lot, but I'll focus a lot on the first half there of what he said. So in biomechanics and all that, I'm going to definitely get into videos where I'm delving deeper and deeper into that, because I don't think it's good to just jump right into that. But I think it's very good to just look at things from a perspective of pedagogy, to where we're teaching, we are coaching, we are cueing, we are trying to achieve certain things with our athletes. And so often what the athlete is actually doing, the way that they're actually running, and what you see, the positions, the movement patterns, all that, sometimes that's different from the cue or what the athlete is thinking and what the athlete is feeling. And I think that those are all multiple things. Like, there's also sometimes a difference between what the athlete thinks and what they feel, what they are trying to do and what they are actually doing. So it's important to distinguish that as a coach when you're looking at film, or looking at them running live. And so it's really important, I think, first off, to do less cueing if you can. Do less of that. There are times where it's definitely necessary, but I would say the less you can do it, the more cautious you are about throwing them out there, probably the better. Ideally, if you are trying to achieve a mechanical change, improve an athlete's form, a lot of times I find it best to get the athlete to do it without actually telling them to do it. So, for example, if you want an athlete to use their arms more, I mean, it could be anything, but I guess arms would be a good example. You can tell them to use them more, but I think that the changes are made more quickly and at a higher quality if you can put the athlete into a exercise or a drill to where they have to use them and they're not really overthinking it. They're not going to overdo it. So if I have an athlete like that, doing some hill sprints is probably a really good idea, because if you have them run a hill, they're going to have to use their arms more to develop more of that force. And there's longer ground contact times when you're doing hills. So they're naturally just going to use their arms more. Or if you have them do same thing with other forms of resistance, like resisted runs, sleds. Sometimes there's different cable bands and things that you can use to run with. Resisted running will usually promote them to run with better arm action, and they're not even going to have to think about it. I mean, you're not even going to have to really cue it. You just have them do the exercise and they use their arms more. Same thing with like push-up starts, or starts where they're flat on the ground. So you just have the athlete lay face down on the ground and then just sprint out of it, scramble out of it. And the fact that they're going to have to push themselves up off the ground and propel themselves from a low position, that's going to make them really drive their arms too. So and I guess a term that is used for that is reactive drills. Sometimes it's called that, but basically exercises that put the athlete in position automatically without them having to think about it. Now, I will say there are cases where you have an athlete that maybe was overcoached on something. Something was really hardwired into them to where you put them in a reactive drill and they still have the same issue. There are situations like that. And in that situation, yeah, like that's where you try a cue next. I would say that, and now, granted, there are sometimes other issues. I'm just saying, granted, the athlete doesn't have an injury they're returning from, or some type of muscular tension or tightness, a joint issue, whatever the case may be. There's multiple reasons why an athlete might actually have a mechanical issue. But those things aside, generally you start with reactive drills, and if that doesn't work, as far as the learning process goes, yes, cue, and also visualize. Have them watch film. That's really important. But to talk more about cueing in itself, again, just going back to what Flash said, basically there's a difference between what the athlete is doing and what they're feeling. And I would add that what they're thinking and what they're actually feeling is sometimes different too. However, sometimes it's congruent. Sometimes an athlete is objectively doing something and it feels that way and they're thinking of it in that way. Sometimes an athlete is moving very quickly with a high frequency, which may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing, maybe kind of a neutral thing, depends on the person. But they're moving quickly and they feel quick, and maybe they're thinking quick. Sometimes it's all the same. Sometimes it's still the same, but they're thinking about, powerful, pushing. So they look like they're definitely pushing. They are thinking about pushing. They feel a push. Some of those things are, sometimes it's all the same, but sometimes it's different. Sometimes they think quick and they're really spending more time on the ground. So there's a disconnect where you might want to find a way to address. Or an athlete feels like they're pushing, they feel powerful, but you look at them and they don't really have, maybe they don't have enough extension. So they're not really pushing, even though they think they are, or they feel like they are. And there's differences again between what the athlete thinks and they feel. They think they think that they feel quick, or they're thinking about being quick, and they're trying to be quick, but they don't actually feel quick. Or they think about being powerful and pushing, but they don't feel like it once they actually use that as like a cue in their mind. You know what I'm saying? So, so it's just important to understand that every athlete's going to be different. It depends on the cue. It depends on their fitness levels, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. It depends on their anatomy. I mean, some athletes are going to feel a certain way just because of how they're built. Like some athletes are very front side built in terms of, well, I guess I would say anteriorly built. You know, they have big quads and big hip flexors maybe, but they have smaller hamstrings, smaller glutes, or they're more posterior built, which would be the opposite. So, different athletes have are going to get different sensations. And as a coach, you have to understand just because you cue something or tell an athlete to do something doesn't mean that you're going to get that same result, you know? Like if you notice an athlete has a restricted range of motion, it looks like maybe their knees aren't coming up very high. You know, there's probably a lot more ways to address that than just say lift your knees, high knees. And I think that that's something that's probably the most overcoached thing typically when we're talking about sprinting. A lot of people just think like, oh, well, I don't have that much knee drive, so I just need to lift my knees more. But the result of having, let's say, a smaller range of motion, less knee drive, is sometimes a result of not putting enough force into the ground, not applying that force quick enough. It has a lot to do typically more with force application in my experience, rather than, you know, oh, you're just not volitionally trying to lift enough. A lot of times it's, you know, the athlete doesn't really need to think too much about that if force is being applied correctly. The knee lift should happen just naturally and automatically if they aren't trying to do anything, you know, goofy or whatever. And so at any rate, there are sometimes you have to go about a different way to correct something than to directly correct it. Same thing if somebody isn't getting enough, on the other hand, if somebody's not getting enough extension, it doesn't seem like they're, you know, getting that push, then you might say that, you know, oh, the solution is just tell them to push more, tell them to extend more. And sometimes the athlete might overextend or overpush because of that. So you have to understand that you have to be, I'd say, just more cautious than not when it comes to cueing, because you don't want to overdo something. I would say typically there's like a spectrum. Some athletes are going to be very kind of push and extension and force application, stride length dominant. And then, of course, you're going to have the opposite where it's like more stride frequency and quickness and short ground contact time, however you want to kind of look at it. But most people are somewhere towards the middle of that spectrum. Not everybody. It's probably somewhat rare to see people who are like really balanced. Usually somebody leans towards one or the other, depending on how they're built, depending on how their nervous system works, depending on a lot of things, their training, and so it's just important to understand too that you're not it's not the best for everybody to try to be perfectly balanced with regards to sort of their stride pattern. Sometimes it's normal and it's good for an athlete to kind of have a tendency, you know. Some people are just naturally built for that like long stride and extension, and that's fine. Some people are built for, you know, being quicker and getting off the ground quick, but not having that much air time, and that's fine too. You know, you just have to make sure that you're not overdoing things. And I think that, again, this goes back to the reactive drills. Typically, you're not going to overdo things. You're not going to exaggerate. The athlete's not going to be likely to exaggerate things if you put them in a position to where they're not going to overthink it. So that's pretty much that pretty much sums up how you want to handle those situations. I would say, other than that, it's important to understand what works for an athlete, and what works for one athlete is not going to work for another athlete. Sometimes an athlete will think quick and they do really well. Another athlete, they think powerful and they do really well with that. Or it's the opposite. Somebody thinks quick and then it just ruins things. Somebody thinks powerful, it ruins things. But either way, you can just cue and use different language and have different like analogies for athletes, and get the optimal result or close to what's optimal, let's say. For example, I'll probably talk about this a little more at some point, but like Carl Lewis, his coach was Tom Tellez, and Carl Lewis, if you look at his information that he's got out there, or Tom Tellez, they talk a lot about pushing and force production. So they definitely cue sort of that aspect a lot more than, like, they don't talk a lot about quickness, especially if we're talking about acceleration. Their emphasis during acceleration is definitely power and force production. Now, on the flip side of that, you have Ben Johnson, who was coached by Charlie Francis, and a lot of the cueing and things that Charlie focused on a lot, if you read about it, was quickness, focus more on turnover, not feeling too heavy, not over pushing, over committing to the push, let's say. So, and I don't think that it's necessarily that these coaches have a super different philosophy. I just think that they had different athletes who achieved great results in different ways for different reasons. For one, look at the anatomical structure of these guys. I mean, Ben Johnson, short, stocky, high numbers in the weight room, squatting 600 plus pounds, benching over 400 pounds. So that's a different style of an athlete than Carl Lewis, who was a jumper, a very elastic guy, obviously lanky, tall and thinner than Ben for sure, and someone who didn't do a lot of weight training. Did more body weight training, medicine ball stuff, but he didn't really do much weight training, hardly any to my knowledge. And so different cues are going to work for these guys differently. See, the fact that Ben was squatting over 600 pounds, if he tries to push, he's probably going to over push, right? So same thing with like Carl. If you tell a guy like that who doesn't have that same base of general strength, then or the same experience in the weight room, I should say, really, then he's going to want to probably be too quick. If you don't tell him to push, it depends on the athlete, right? Like Carl, when he's running well, he feels the push. And that's, for some people, that works really well. Some kids, you tell them it's like pushing a car out of snow, or pushing a heavy shopping cart. You're trying to get that thing going. The first few pushes are slow, compared to the rest of the run, but then it gets going. You can use analogies and stuff like that works well for some people. Then somebody like Ben, it's like, just get going, get into your rhythm, get off the ground. And so, but at the end of the day, both of them have great mechanics. They absolutely do. And so the point is that many roads lead to Rome. There's more than one way to skin a cat, some may say. So there's more than one straight shot of getting things done. There's not, at the end of the day, what I want you to take away from this video is that there is not one size fits all in regards to cues. There's not one that's just like magically works better than another. Some work better for some athletes and some work better for other athletes. Some don't work very well with athletes or some athletes, and so on and so forth. So I guess in the next video, what I'll talk about is maybe some specific cues more so, and how you might use different cues to address certain issues. And I'll come up with some different errors or issues that you might see, and okay, this is how I would address them, specifically with cueing if you can't really do that with reactive drills. So if you have any ideas of that, if you have some things that you're trying to work on with yourself or if you're trying to work on something with your athletes, leave a comment and, just let me know, like, how can I address this type of an issue? Arm action, range of motion, this athlete has, this issue. Just let me know, and I definitely I'll write those down, and I'll put some ideas together for my next video. So appreciate it if you do that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. All right, take care.